The night had settled thick over Larkspur Bay, the kind of humid darkness that holds its breath. A narrow service road wound along the lake's edge, its asphalt still damp from an earlier storm. Only the sodium lamps offered any light, their amber glow stretching thinly across the reeds that lined the water. A patrol car idled near the curve, engine rumbling low, its headlights pushing through the mist as if reluctant to disturb the quiet. A young deputy stood beside the vehicle, his boots sinking slightly into the softened earth. He lifted a flashlight, sweeping the beam over the shoreline, and the light caught the ripple of something pale beneath the reeds. The deputy drew in a sharp breath. Even from a distance, he knew the shape was wrong, too still, too out of place in this wet, breathing landscape. As he stepped closer, the reeds brushed against his legs, releasing a smell of muck and lake water that clung to the air like memory. He paused a few feet away. The outline became clearer, bone where there should have been skin, the faint suggestion of fabric clinging to fragments, and a silver glint that might once have been a ring. The deputy swallowed hard and reached for his radio, but his hand hovered before he made contact. For a moment he simply stood there, staring at what the lake had been holding quietly for decades. Farther up the road, another car approached, its tires whispering against the wet asphalt. The driver stepped out slowly, leaning heavily on the door as he surveyed the scene. His hair had gone gray, and the lines across his face cut deeper in the glow of the headlights. Detective Samuel Delaney had thought he had made peace with the unfinished cases in his life, but the call he received tonight about remains found beneath the reeds he once searched pulled something old and unsettled back into the present. He joined the deputy, letting silence settle between them before he spoke. The lake smelled the same as it had all those years ago. The reeds whispered the same restless sound. But now there was something else, a faint sense that the stillness he once mistook for closure had been hiding truth instead. Delaney crouched, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light. He noted the fragments of denim, the position of the bones, the familiar shape of the shoreline. His mind drifted back to the early days of the investigation, the uncertainty, the conflicting reports, the feeling that he was trying to build a story from pieces that refused to fit together. He had followed every lid until they thinned into nothing, until the case was boxed, labeled, and quietly pushed to the back of the cold case room. Yet he kept a copy of the old sketch pinned above his desk, unable to forget the face that never fully existed. Tonight, something felt different. Not because the remains had resurfaced, they had never truly been gone, but because a few hours earlier, he had received an email he almost ignored. A modern forensic portrait. A face made with tools he never had, rendered with clarity he once only hoped for. It was a face that seemed to meet his gaze with a steady, familiar quiet, as if finally asking to be known. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded printout of the reconstruction. Even in the dim light, the eyes seemed alive, shaped by data rather than imagination. He held the paper next to the pale remains and felt a subtle shift, like something long dormant stirring awake. Behind him, the deputy spoke softly, as though afraid the night might swallow his words. "Do you think it's her?" Delaney didn't answer immediately. He studied the jawline, the delicate curve of bone, the suggestion of who this person might have been. The old sketch had never captured it. The guesses about ancestry, age, and identity had always drifted in different directions. But this new portrait, this careful, inclusive reconstruction, felt like a key finally turned in the right lock. He stood slowly, letting the humid air settle between them. "If it is," he said quietly, "then this isn't just a recovery. It's a return." The deputy looked out across the lake, where the darkness seemed to press closer to the shore. "What happens now?" Delaney folded the portrait, slipping it back into his coat. "Now," he murmured, "we start over." With clearer eyes, in the distance, another set of headlights appeared, crime scene technicians arriving to begin the work Delaney had once believed finished. Their lights cut arcs across the reeds, illuminating the water in brief flashes. Each sweep of brightness revealed how much the lake had held, and how long it had waited for someone to look again. Delaney turned away from the shoreline, letting the familiar ache settle in his chest. The past no longer felt unreachable. Not with a face restored. Not with family somewhere out there who had never stopped wondering what became of the woman they lost. He took one last look at the quiet shape beneath the reeds, then spoke the words that would open the path back to the beginning. To understand how this began, we go back to 1988. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe now. It helps us bring more truth to light. Ariela Quinn's life was built out of small, portable routines, the kind that fit inside a backpack and could be carried across state lines without ever appearing remarkable. She woke early most days, even when she had nowhere particular to be. Morning light always found her before she was ready for it, creeping through cheap motel curtains or the blinds of rented rooms. She would sit at the foot of whatever bed she occupied that week and tie her hair back with the thin black ribbon she carried everywhere. It wasn't sentimental. It was simply hers, one of the few objects that survived every transition. Work came in waves. Sometimes she waited tables in roadside diners where the air smelled of coffee and frying oil. Sometimes she helped clean lakefront cabins in small tourist towns. Sometimes she stood behind motel counters answering phones for guests who barely glanced at her. She moved through these jobs with a quiet steadiness. People often remembered her as polite, soft-spoken, or simply hard to place. She had one of those faces that shifted depending on the light, depending on who was looking, depending on what they expected to see. In the rare stretches when she stayed in one place long enough, she kept certain rituals. She collected postcards from each town she passed through, always the cheapest ones from metal racks near cash registers. She never wrote on them. She didn't send them to anyone. She kept them bundled with a rubber band, flipping through them on nights when she couldn't sleep. They served as both reminder and reassurance. She had been somewhere, even if no one else knew it. At gas stations, she bought small spiral notebooks and used them as journals. She didn't write full entries, just fragments, lists of things she needed, observations about strangers, pieces of conversations overheard at laundromats or coffee shops. Her handwriting was compact, tilting slightly left, as if leaning away from the world. When she filled one notebook, she would toss it into her bag, telling herself she would read it someday. She never did. Her relationship with her sister Marianne existed mostly in phone calls spaced too far apart, but never forgotten. Marianne always asked where she was, what she was doing, whether she planned to come home for a little while. Ariela always gave vague answers. Florida for now, maybe Georgia next. Just working, just staying busy. Marianne understood the gaps, understood that urgency would only push Ariela farther. Their conversations drifted between concern and affection, never quite resolving anything, but never losing warmth either. There were days when Ariela felt the ache of distance sharply. She would sit alone in a diner booth, drawing shapes in the condensation on her glass, thinking about holidays missed and family dinners she had once taken for granted. At other times, the distance felt necessary, like a buffer that gave her space to breathe. She wasn't running away, not exactly. She was looking for something she couldn't articulate, a sense of belonging that wasn't tied to a single place. People came and went around her. Co-workers learned her name only after a week, sometimes longer. Travelers asked for directions, then forgot her as soon as they walked out the door. She made casual friendships with other transient workers, bonding over shared shifts or late-night meals, but those connections never lasted. She understood that some lives were built for movement, and hers was one of them. Still, the small kindnesses stayed with her. The older woman in Georgia who slipped her extra cornbread at the end of a shift. The fisherman in Alabama who told her which towns were hiring seasonal help. The mechanic in Mississippi who fixed her worn-out backpack strap without charging a cent. These gestures formed a quiet map of humanity she carried with her on long bus rides and lonely evenings. By early summer of 1988, she had drifted into Central Florida, where the lakes were wide and the air hung thick with humidity. She found work cleaning rental cabins near Larkspur Bay, A job that paid little but offered steady hours. She liked the predictability of it, the smell of fresh detergent, the cool interior of the cabins before the sun climbed too high, the soft thud of her shoes on wooden floors. She kept mostly to herself, earning a reputation as someone reliable, someone who didn't cause trouble or invite it. The symbolic habits that threaded her life continued here. She bought a new notebook, this one pale blue, and filled its first pages with lists, supplies she needed, towns she meant to visit, thoughts she didn't want to forget. She added a new postcard to her collection, a glossy photo of a lakeside sunset that looked more orange than real. She kept the silver ring she always wore, a simple band she had picked up from a vendor years earlier. It wasn't valuable, but it grounded her, a rare object that had stayed with her across every move. Co-workers noticed her ring occasionally. Some assumed it had sentimental value, that it came from someone important. She never corrected them. Letting people fill in the blanks was easier than explaining what the ring really was. A thing she chose, a thing she kept, a reminder that not everything she owned had to be temporary. One afternoon, she took a walk along the service road near the lake, the air warm and heavy, cicadas buzzing in the distance. She held her notebook under her arm and listened to the soft rustling of reeds as she passed. On days like these, she imagined what it would feel like to stop moving for good, to live somewhere long enough for people to remember her. Favorite foods, her laugh, the way she hummed songs she never knew the words to. She wondered if she would ever find that place. Near the end of her time in Larkspur Bay, Ariela called Marianne from a payphone outside a grocery store. The sun was setting and the metal receiver felt warm in her hand. She told her sister she was doing okay, that work was steady, that she'd try to visit soon. Marianne asked if she needed money, asked if she was staying safe, asked if she could call more often. Ariela promised she would. The call was short, but meaningful in a way neither of them appreciated fully. They said goodbye with the quiet familiarity of two people who loved each other, but lived in separate worlds. That night, Ariela wrote a few lines in her notebook before bed. Nothing dramatic, just a reminder to buy more detergent, a note about a dream she couldn't quite remember, and the words, "Maybe I'll stay a little longer." The next day would begin like any other. She would walk to work, tie her hair back with her ribbon, straighten the silver ring on her finger, and glance at the lake as she passed. The water would reflect the morning light in still muted colors. She would not know that this would be the last time she saw it. She would not know that the silence she carried so easily through life would soon become the silence that defined her absence. The final morning of Ariela Quinn's life unfolded quietly, almost indistinguishably from the days that came before it. The sun rose through a haze of low clouds, warming the damp boards of the cabin decks and lifting the faint smell of wet pine from the ground. She left her rented room just after 7, tying her hair back with the black ribbon she always carried. Her notebook was tucked beneath her arm, and her silver ring caught the early light as she walked. There was nothing about her movement that suggested fear or urgency. She walked with the steady rhythm of someone beginning another ordinary day. By mid-morning, she had cleaned 3 cabins. Fresh linens hung slightly crooked on the beds, but the room smelled of detergent and open windows. She stepped out into the humidity, wiped her palms on her jeans, and paused in the shade to drink from the plastic bottle she kept clipped to her bag. A couple staying in cabin 4 passed her with a polite nod. She returned it with a small smile, slipping her bottle away and adjusting the strap of her bag. Near noon, she was seen at the small grocery store on Larkspur Bay Road. A clerk remembered her buying detergent, a pack of crackers, and a postcard. She lingered near the payphone outside, flipping through the notebook as if deciding whether to make a call. She didn't. Instead, she walked toward the lake, choosing the quieter side of town rather than the main road. The heat rose in waves from the asphalt, and the air felt heavy enough to fold. By 1 in the afternoon, the sky dimmed with the promise of a storm. Several residents later recalled hearing thunder in the distance. The reeds along the lake shifted restlessly, and the surface of the water took on a darker sheen. Ariela continued down the service road, her steps slow but deliberate. She was seen by a fisherman cleaning his equipment near the shoreline. He remembered her only briefly: dark hair, slim figure, a notebook held against her chest. She didn't speak to him. She walked past, turning toward the narrower stretch of road where the reeds grew taller, thickening the farther they stretched along the water. No one saw the moment she left the road. That part of the timeline would remain speculative, reconstructed from fragments of evidence, environmental cues, and the grim logic of the setting. Investigators believe she may have been approached by someone familiar with the area, someone comfortable enough to gesture toward the quiet space between the reeds where the lake bent inward. There were no signs of a struggle on the roadside itself. No dropped belongings, no torn fabric, nothing that suggested sudden violence. Whatever happened took place out of sight, beneath the shifting cover of reeds where the damp earth muffled sound. The storm finally broke that afternoon. Rain swept across the lake in diagonal sheets, pushing waves up against the narrow bank. The reeds shook violently under the wind. Lightning cracked somewhere distant, but close enough to rattle window panes in town. The storm lasted 30 minutes, then moved on as quickly as it arrived, leaving behind the thick smell of wet earth and the metallic tang of stirred lake water. The following hours in the timeline were blank. Ariela did not return to the cabins. She did not call her sister. She did not check into the motel where she sometimes stayed when cabin work slowed. She left no message and made no purchases. The silent pocket of time stretched through the late afternoon and into the fading light of evening, when the lake settled again into its heavy stillness. She was not reported missing. Not that day. Not that week. Her disappearance was quiet, almost frictionless, as if absorbed by the routine ebb and flow of a transient life. The first real sign that something had happened would not emerge until the next morning, when the storm's aftermath revealed what the night had hidden. At dawn, a mechanic named Louis Farrow drove along the service road on his way to a job site. The sun was still low, filtered through thin clouds that hadn't yet decided whether to burn away or gather into another storm. The ground was saturated, small puddles reflecting the pale sky. Farrow kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other gripping a travel mug of coffee, his eyes scanning for fallen branches or debris that might puncture his tires. As he rounded the bend near the lake, something caught his attention, a patch of pale color near the reeds. At first he assumed it was a piece of driftwood or a tangle of lake debris dragged up by the storm. But as he slowed the truck, the shape held too still, too defined. He pulled over, his boots sinking into the softened soil as he stepped toward the water's edge. The reeds were tall, brushing against his clothes and releasing the rich smell of mud and decaying vegetation. The air vibrated faintly with insects returning after the storm. Farrow moved carefully, pushing back the reeds until the pale shape emerged again. It took him a moment to understand what he was looking at. A fragment of bone, the curve of a jaw, and beneath it the faint glint of metal, what he would later describe as a small silver ring. He stumbled back, breath catching. The morning seemed to quiet around him, the lake surface perfectly still, as if withholding judgment. He took several unsteady steps to his truck and grabbed the radio from the dashboard. His voice broke twice before he managed to report the discovery. Within an hour, deputies arrived. The sun climbed higher, brightening the water and revealing more beneath the reeds. Bone fragments. Fibers from a denim jacket, their color dulled by time and weather. Soil disturbed in a pattern that suggested the remains had shifted during the storm. The reeds had grown thick around the site, almost knitting themselves into a barrier that kept the remains concealed. Detective Samuel Delaney arrived last. His experience drew him immediately to the smaller details around the scene. He noted the absence of large animal disturbance. The limited scattering of bones implied the location had sheltered the remains. The denim fibers clung to roots and soil as though they had been there far longer than a single season. Everything about the scene whispered of time, not recent violence. Delaney crouched near the edge of the reeds, letting the dampness soak through his pant legs. He studied the fragments, trying to map them to the file he once carried everywhere, the case of an unidentified woman whose features never aligned with the early forensic reports. He remembered the confusion, the dead ends, the feeling that the truth sat just beyond reach. What caught his attention most, though, was the position of the silver ring. It rested near the jaw fragment, the metal tarnished but intact, as though it had remained on the victim's hand until weather finally loosened it. Rings didn't often stay near skeletal remains for decades. They slid away in storms, got caught in roots, or sank into the earth. Yet this one sat quietly, as if waiting to be found. Crime scene technicians worked slowly, documenting each fragment with measured precision. Soil samples were taken. Plant material was collected. Delaney watched the process with the controlled patience of someone who understood how long justice could take. The morning sun warmed the back of his neck, and the smell of stirred lake water drifted across the air. The timeline reconstruction began that same day. Investigators cross-checked recent cabin logs, payphone records, and sightings along the service road. One by one, they built the final hours of Ariela's known life. The clerk at the grocery store confirmed seeing her. The fisherman recalled her passing quietly with her notebook. The storm's arrival created a natural boundary in the timeline, a clear marker dividing before and after. But there was one detail that unsettled Delaney. A footprint, half preserved in the damp soil near the reeds. Not Ariela's, larger, deeper, the kind left by someone familiar with the terrain. Someone who had pressed through the soft earth with deliberate steps. The print was distorted by the storm and useless for identification, but its direction mattered. It led away from the water, back toward the service road, and disappeared into a patch of gravel that held no impressions at all. As technicians cleared the area, Delaney lingered, looking from the footprint to the ring, then back to the lake. Something about the placement of artifacts implied the killer knew the reeds, knew the curve of the lake, knew how far the storm might carry sound. The scene held more knowledge than it revealed. He took slow breaths, letting the smells of damp vegetation and sun-warmed mud settle around him. The lake reflected the sky in muted tones, still and unbothered, as though guarding the secrets beneath it. The evidence would travel to the lab. The bones would be cleaned and preserved. The denim fibers would be examined under magnification. The ring would be cataloged. And the footprint would be photographed, though it could offer nothing definitive. But one thing remained unresolved, a small detail that lodged itself in Delaney's mind long after he left the scene. Near the base of the reeds, just beyond the ring, he noticed an imprint in the mud shallow, almost washed away. It looked like something rectangular had rested there. Something the storm had knocked loose. No object matching the shape was found. Whatever it was had vanished. And with that, the scene kept one final piece of the truth just out of reach. The investigation began with determination, a sense of urgency that often follows the discovery of unidentified remains. For the first few months, detectives worked with the kind of focused energy that suggests every day might bring the missing piece. They spoke to cabin workers, fishermen, clerks, and anyone who had crossed paths with transient laborers during that humid summer. They assembled timelines, mapped movements, and rechecked details until the edges of their notes blurred from handling. But the confusion started early. The initial forensic assessments, shaped by the limits of 1980s methods, disagreed in ways that seeded doubt into every lead that surfaced. One examiner believed the victim was a teenage boy. Another reported a woman in her 30s. A third declared uncertainty so complete that none of their findings could anchor the investigation. The sketches reflected this conflict, one angular and masculine, another soft and feminine, neither resembling the woman Ariela truly was. When investigators canvassed missing person reports, the mismatched descriptions cut out entire categories of potential matches. Anyone searching for a daughter, sister, or friend who didn't align neatly with those flawed profiles never saw their loved one reflected in the posters taped to grocery store doors. Still, the leads trickled in. The first false suspect appeared only weeks after the discovery. A man working at a lakeside repair shop was reported acting suspiciously, seen burning something behind the building late at night. They searched the area anyway, sifting through the ashes for clues. All they found were charred scraps of paper, none bearing significance. The suspect's relief turned quickly to irritation. "You wasting my time over nothing," he muttered. "It's a lake town. People burn things. It's what we do." Investigators moved on, unconvinced but unable to justify holding him. A second false suspect came from a call placed to the sheriff's office by a trucker passing through from Georgia. He claimed he had picked up a hitchhiker matching one of the composite sketches. She had seemed nervous, he said. Kept checking over her shoulder at passing cars. She got off at a rest stop near the state line. When asked for details, the trucker hesitated. His description shifted skin tone, hair length, clothing. Detectives eventually realized he was describing a memory from years earlier. Blurred by time and guilt, it led nowhere. By then, the early momentum had already started to drag. Inside the sheriff's office, the caseboard collected more red string and pinned notes than concrete evidence. Delaney often stood in front of it long after others went home, staring at the driver's license photos of missing people from surrounding states. He searched each face for the subtle familiarity he couldn't quite articulate, a feeling that someone out there was waiting for answers. But the details didn't line up. Their timelines diverged, or their dental records failed to match, or their family histories contradicted the biology estimated in the reports. Talking to the media became a ritual of frustration. Reporters wanted a narrative, an angle, a threat, a larger pattern. But Delaney could offer only uncertainty. "We're exploring all possibilities," he said again and again. "Is this connected to the string of disappearances along the interstate?" one reporter asked. "We don't have evidence of that. Is the victim a local resident? We don't know. Is the suspect still in the area? We're looking into it." The public grew restless with the lack of progress. Some residents whispered that the victim must have been a drifter, someone who had wandered into the wrong place and left no one to miss her. Others speculated that she was part of a larger, hidden criminal pattern. The truth, buried beneath reeds and time, refused to align with any convenient explanation. Months passed, then a year, then two. Ariela's family remained unaware of her connection to Larkspur Bay, continuing to search for answers hundreds of miles away. Marianne called various agencies, hoping for updates on missing person cases that resembled her sister's, even vaguely. Each time she asked whether anyone matching Ariela's description had been found, she received the same reply. Not at this time. When she hung up, the silence in her apartment felt too heavy to breathe through. She lit a candle by the window, her small ritual, a way of reminding herself that Ariela's story wasn't over. She wrote letters to organizations that tracked missing adults, attaching photos and brief summaries. Months later, some came back undelivered, addressed to defunct databases or discontinued programs. Back in Florida, detectives followed another lead when a drifter was arrested for theft near the town. He carried a denim jacket in the back of his truck, the same brand and color as the fragments found near the reeds. When questioned, he waved off the coincidence. "Everyone wears denim," he said with a shrug. "Nothing special." They tested the jacket. The fibers didn't match. The drifter was released. At one point, investigators focused on a maintenance worker who often traveled through the cabins where Ariela had been employed. He had a record of small infractions and a reputation for being volatile. When interviewed, he grew defensive, insisting he barely knew the cleaning staff and had never spoken to the woman in question. His alibi for the day of the storm was flimsy, but the evidence wasn't strong enough to hold him. When detectives returned later to re-interview him, he had already left the state. "I told you," he had said during the first interview. "You're looking for the wrong guy." They weren't sure whether he was right or lying, But either way, the trail grew cold. Delaney carried the weight more than the others. He reviewed the case file often enough to wear the corners of certain pages. He kept the original sketch pinned above his desk, though he trusted it less with each passing month. The features looked generic, lacking anything that could tie the drawing convincingly to a real person. But he couldn't bring himself to take it down. Removing the sketch felt too close to giving up. He developed a habit of driving past the service road every few weeks. Sometimes he stopped the car and sat with the engine off, listening to the faint rustle of reeds along the lake. He imagined the last moments Ariela spent on that road, how quiet it must have been, how the storm arrived before anyone realized she was missing. He searched his memory for any overlooked detail, any small point of contact he had missed during the early canvassing. But the facts remained stubbornly incomplete. 2 years after the discovery, a new forensic analyst reviewed the biological report and proposed a different interpretation. She believed the victim might belong to a distinct ancestry grouping that didn't match any local missing person files. But the county lacked the tools to confirm her hypothesis, and the suggestion only muddied the waters further. When Delaney tried to pursue the angle, funding delays and bureaucratic obstacles stalled the effort. Eventually, the analysis was set aside with a note: inconclusive. False sightings continued to surface. A woman in Tallahassee claimed the victim resembled someone who had vanished from her hometown. But the missing woman had a distinctive birthmark that Ariela's remains did not indicate. A man in Alabama insisted he recognized the sketch as someone he had once worked with in a factory. But the timelines mismatched so severely that the detectives couldn't justify the trip to interview him. The frustration built slowly, like humidity accumulating before a storm. Every lead began to feel like chasing reflections on the water, always shifting, always dissolving when approached. One afternoon, near the end of the 3rd year, Delaney sat across from a state investigator who had agreed to review the case. "You've done what you can," the man said gently. "Some cases don't resolve. Some don't have the pieces needed. That doesn't mean we should close it. It doesn't mean you should carry it alone either." Delaney looked at the file on the table, the thick manila folder containing every scrap of the victim's story. The analyst tapped the folder once, a gesture meant to be sympathetic. "She deserves better," Delaney said quietly. "She does," the investigator replied. "But better may not come from here." The file was labeled and moved to the cold case archive. In a different state, Marianne sensed the shift without knowing why. She made another round of calls, hoping for news, but nothing had changed. She sat on her bed that night, flipping through the postcards Ariela once sent her, only a handful, each bearing short messages and vague details. She traced the edges of the cards with her fingers, wishing she had more to hold on to. Years continued to pass. The investigation lost its momentum, swallowed by time and limited resources. Some of the detectives originally assigned to the case transferred or retired. The footprint, the denim fibers, the silver ring, they all remained preserved in evidence boxes, but their meanings seemed frozen, unyielding. Forensic technology advanced, but budget constraints kept the county from sending the samples for more sophisticated testing. Eventually, even Delaney had to accept the quiet. He boxed up the sketch, though he hesitated before closing the lid. A fine layer of dust settled over the case file in the archive, softening its label the same way years had softened the outlines of Ariela's memory in the community. Her story drifted into the background of Larkspur Bay, not forgotten but no longer spoken of openly. The last official note added to the case file came 10 years after the remains were found. It read, "No further leads. Status unchanged." And beneath that line, almost illegible in faint pencil, someone had written a single word: waiting. The years after Ariela disappeared carried a peculiar rhythm for the people who loved her, as if time had two currents, the one in which the world moved forward, and the one in which she stayed frozen at 26. Her sister Marianne felt this most sharply. Each birthday she marked for Ariela became a reminder of time passing unevenly, of a life that should have been growing, but instead remained suspended in absence. She kept a shoebox beneath her bed, filled with the few things her sister had left behind. A handful of postcards with sunsets and cityscapes, each blank on the back, 2 notebooks with half-finished lists, and a photograph of the two of them standing beside a rusted mailbox outside their childhood home. In the photo, Marianne was smiling, leaning into her younger sister, while Ariela's expression was smaller, thoughtful, her gaze angled slightly away from the camera. The edges of the photo softened with age, curling a little more every year, as if it were inhaling decades of unanswered questions. Marianne wrote letters sometimes never sent, just folded neatly into the shoebox. She wrote about everyday things, how the weather had changed, how the neighborhood bakery had closed, how their mother had started crocheting small blankets for church drives. She told Ariela about her own life as it shifted, new roommates, new jobs, new apartments. The letters were written in the tone of someone trying to anchor a relationship that belonged to the world of the living, not to memory. There was no ritual to when she wrote them. Some years brought 5 or 6 letters. Other years, none. She aged quietly. Her hair accumulated a few strands of gray. The skin around her eyes creased when she smiled. She kept working, kept breathing, kept hoping, and in the middle of all of that, she carried a grief too gentle to collapse her, but strong enough to shape her. There were days when she convinced herself that Ariela might have chosen to disappear, that her transient habits had simply extended into something more distant. But on the harder nights when the wind shook her apartment windows and the candle burned low on her table, she admitted the truth that lived beneath every other possibility, that her sister was gone and no one knew where or why. The world changed around her while the case stayed still. Phone numbers changed, area codes shifted. Missing person databases modernized and merged. The old physical bulletin boards at bus stations gave way to online forums. Marianne learned to navigate new systems, searching for anyone matching her sister's features, entering parameters into search engines that pulled from thousands of unresolved cases. Most nights she found nothing new, but she kept searching. In Florida, the community of Larkspur Bay aged as well. Some of the cabins where Ariela worked were torn down, replaced by newer rentals with bright siding and modern windows. The grocery store where she bought her last postcard changed owners twice. The payphone outside was removed, replaced by a metal ashtray bolted to the wall. Small adjustments layered over the town until the landscape no longer remembered her footsteps. But memory isn't tethered only to place. A few people kept fragments of her story. A former cabin worker remembered the quiet woman who cleaned efficiently and never complained. A clerk recalled her purchasing detergent, turning the postcard over in her hands before slipping it into her bag. A fisherman vaguely recalled seeing her the day before the storm, walking with her notebook pressed against her chest. These recollections drifted like faint echoes, too scattered to form a full shape, too persistent to disappear entirely. Detective Sam Delaney aged alongside the case. His hair thinned and turned white. His posture stiffened and the lines on his face deepened into grooves. After retiring, he kept a small desk in his home office where he stored copies of unsolved files that still clung to him. The case of the unidentified woman found in the reeds never left that drawer. Sometimes he opened it without taking anything out, letting the smell of old paper rise like a quiet reminder of unfinished work. He often thought about calling other agencies, renewing requests for updated technology, or contacting families in nearby states who might still be searching. He did these things sporadically. Each attempt ended the same way: polite sympathy, minimal progress, and a growing list of obstacles: funding, jurisdiction, time. As the years pressed forward, the case seemed to stretch thin, like a photograph left too long in the sun. But even thin things carry weight. Marianne lived through seasons, not years. Autumn always hit hardest. The sound of leaves scraping against sidewalks reminded her of walking home with Ariela in the fading light. their conversations braided with small jokes and shared silences. She kept the shoebox on a shelf in her closet now, pulling it down only on the quietest evenings, the ones when she felt closest to the version of her sister who still laughed easily. Once, she tried writing to law enforcement in Florida, asking for updates. She received a brief reply, no new information. Attached was a photocopy of a sketch that bore no resemblance to her sister's actual face, angular, ambiguous, created by a forensic artist who never knew the person behind the bones. Marianne stared at it for a long time, wondering how anyone could recognize someone they loved from that drawing. She tucked the photocopy into her shoebox with the others. It felt wrong to throw it away, even if it didn't look like Ariela. Time passed unevenly in Larkspur Bay as well. Some years brought storms strong enough to swell the lake and flood the service road. Other years passed with calmer weather, the reeds whispering in their usual patterns. Locals told newcomers stories about the remains found there long ago, their details blurred by retellings. Some spoke of a transient girl. Others believed the victim was a young man. The contradictions grew until the story became something intangible, a legend more than a person. The truth of her identity slipped between versions, waiting for something to anchor it again. Technology crept forward, quietly reshaping the world. Marianne bought her first laptop in the early 2000s, learning slowly how to navigate websites and email. She joined online groups devoted to missing person cases, posting Ariela's photo each year on her birthday. She engaged with other families living in similar uncertainty, exchanging short messages of solidarity, fragments of hope. Some nights she stayed awake reading forum threads about unidentified remains found across the country, scrolling through images that never matched her sister. But she looked anyway. One spring, a journalist contacted her, a young woman writing a piece on long-term missing person cases and the families left behind. They spoke over the phone for nearly an hour. Marianne described her sister in vivid detail, her small rituals, her way of tilting her head when listening, her quiet independence. The journalist listened carefully, then admitted she hadn't heard of any new leads in years, but she wanted to highlight the emotional cost of waiting. When the article was published, Marianne clipped it and added it to the shoebox. She didn't know if it would help, but it felt like a way of keeping her sister's story from slipping further into obscurity. In Florida, the old cold case archive in Cypress Hollow County underwent gradual digital cataloging. Files were scanned, tagged, and added to a system meant to organize the backlog. The file labeled Larkspur Doe, 1988 was scanned too, its pages preserved into a format that allowed it to be seen without touching the paper. The sketch remained the first image in the digital file. The notes, already smudged from years of handling, now appeared crisp on a monitor, their uncertainties preserved with unsettling clarity. The case still drew no new leads. Another decade passed. Marianne moved apartments twice, each time carefully carrying the shoebox with her. She changed jobs once, managing a small bookstore downtown. She filled her life with habits that grounded her, watering plants, reading late into the night, walking to the park on Sundays. These routines helped her remain centered, but the ache of not knowing never fully faded. It settled into her like a quiet companion. Delaney's health declined. He walked slower, thought slower, carried the weight of unsolved cases like a braid of worry across his shoulders. He kept the unidentified woman's file near the front of his drawer, returning to it when bouts of restlessness pulled at him. Sometimes he felt foolish for harboring hope, but he couldn't let go of the idea that technology might eventually catch up to the mystery. He had seen science shift before methods once considered final, now outdated, replaced by tools capable of reconstructing identities from traces left behind. The world was changing. Maybe enough to break open even this case. The smallest spark came not from a dramatic event, but from a line in a pamphlet left at a community meeting about forensic advancements. It mentioned new techniques in DNA sequencing for unidentified remains, highlighting inclusive methods that could extract information older approaches failed to detect. Delaney circled the paragraph, tearing the page out to keep in his desk. Months later, during a casual conversation with a former colleague still working at the department, he mentioned the pamphlet. The colleague shrugged, saying funding was limited, but interest was growing statewide. There were whispers of partnerships with advanced labs, whispers of grants, whispers of change. It wasn't a breakthrough, not yet, but it was something. A shift in the wind. A reminder that silence was not permanence. Even if the path back to Ariela's name had grown over with years of quiet, some part of the world was beginning to clear the way again. And for Marianne, who still lit her candle and still checked the forums, and still opened her shoebox every so often just to touch the life her sister left behind, it was enough to keep the waiting from turning into surrender. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop an emoji in the comments. It began with a cardboard box that looked too old to hold anything capable of changing the future. When the courier placed it on the receiving counter at the forensic lab, the package sat quietly among newer, sharper containers labeled with barcodes and stamped inventory codes. Its corners were softened from decades of storage. The handwriting on the tag had faded to a muted blue. It carried the weight of a story paused mid-sentence. Dr. Evelyn Klein noticed it the moment she walked in that morning. She paused with her coffee halfway to her lips, drawn by something she couldn't fully explain. The label identified the case number from Cypress Hollow County, and the date written beneath it reached back more than 30 years. It was the kind of file that usually held more questions than answers, a relic from a time when science was built on partial truths and best guesses. Yet something about the simplicity of the box, the quietness of its arrival, suggested potential. She signed it in, carried it to her workstation, and set it under the bright halo of her lamp. Inside were bones wrapped carefully in archival materials, a segment of femur, several ribs, part of a jaw. Alongside them were two faded sketches, portraits drawn from uncertain hands that tried to imagine the face of someone they never knew. Evelyn studied the features, noting how the angular lines in one drawing contradicted the softened jawline in the other. Neither looked convincingly human. Neither looked convincingly like the same person. She examined the bones next. Their surfaces bore the delicate texturing of age and environmental exposure, yet they remained solid enough to promise something more beneath. She selected the femur piece first, as it offered the highest likelihood of preserved nuclear DNA. Carefully, she shaved off the outer layer, removing potential contamination, and isolated a dense inner fragment. The lab around her hummed to life. Machines booted. Doors opened and closed. Conversations drifted in and out. But Evelyn worked with measured focus, as if the world outside had narrowed to the small universe inside the evidence box. She prepped the sample, placed it inside the bone pulverizer, and listened as the device softened decades of silence into a powder fine enough to release secrets. Hours passed. The process unfolded with the kind of patience only forensic science required. After incubation, filtration, and extraction, Evelyn transferred the isolated DNA strands into the sequencing machine. She touched the screen lightly, initiating the run, watching the lights blink to life. In a few hours or more, the raw genomic data would begin to form its pattern. She used the time to revisit the digital file sent by the sheriff's office. It contained images of the discovery site, reeds bending under stormwater, fragments of denim fibers clinging to roots, the silver ring lying near the jaw. She saw the partial footprint, preserved in mud, and the faint rectangular impression whose absence had never been explained. The environment had sheltered the remains, but also blurred the timeline. This case lacked everything that made identification straightforward. There were no dental records, no fingerprints, no personal belongings besides the ring. Only bones, guesswork, and 34 years of waiting. The first wave of sequence data arrived just after noon. Evelyn leaned in, scanning the screen as the machine translated nucleotides into readable profiles. These profiles didn't speak in the poetic language of memory. They spoke in coded signals that revealed ancestry, predicted features, reconstructed traits. She saw patterns emerging: mixed heritage, strong cheekbones, dark hair probability, mid-20s age range. Already, the information contradicted the earliest forensic assessments. She allowed herself a controlled exhale. Progress. She transferred the data to the craniofacial software and loaded the scanned images of the skull fragments. Slowly, the program built a model: bone structure first, then muscular overlays, then skin. The computer formed the beginnings of a face: subtle angles, soft lines, a human presence taking shape from what had been hidden for decades. By evening, the rendering approached completion. Evelyn adjusted markers along the brow ridge, refined the dental projection, tweaked the cheek contour. The face that emerged appeared calm, composed, with eyes that suggested someone who moved through the world quietly, but with intention. It was a face that felt familiar despite belonging to someone unknown. She saved the final image. The timestamp read 8:14 p.m. She emailed the reconstruction to Cypress Hollow County with a brief note: updated facial approximation based on inclusive genomic sequencing. Potential match likelihood significantly increased. Across the state, Detective Sam Delaney, older, now retired, and slower in movement, opened his laptop to find the message. He clicked on the attachment, expecting another guess, another iteration in a long line of approximations. But when the image illuminated his screen, he felt something shift deep in his chest. The features no longer contradicted one another. They aligned. They spoke. He reached for a file in his drawer, the one he had carried for decades. Inside, he unfolded the sketches drawn so many years earlier, placing them side by side with the digital portrait. For the first time, the case felt less like a puzzle missing pieces and more like a story stepping into focus. Delaney forwarded the image to the cold case unit. Within hours, staff uploaded it to their public channels, labeled carefully with the date of the discovery and the reconstructed features. The portrait circulated quickly. On local news stations, it appeared between weather updates and community event notices. Online, it passed through forums devoted to missing person investigations. People commented quietly, offering names, speculations, fragments of possibility. 3 states away, Ariela Quinn sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. She paused when she saw the portrait, her breath caught before she even understood why. She leaned closer to the screen, her fingers trembling as she traced the outline of the jawline, the familiar curve of the mouth. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Recognition rose through her like a tide. She whispered her sister's name. It broke in her throat. She called the sheriff's office before she lost her resolve. Hours later, she collected herself in the mirror, preparing to speak with detectives who had spent decades searching for answers she thought had disappeared forever. When the call connected, her voice was soft but certain. "I think the woman in that picture is my sister." Her DNA sample arrived at the lab days later, packaged with the care of someone handling something sacred. Evelyn received it personally. She ran it through the system, cross-referencing it with the genomic markers pulled from the remains. The match appeared on her screen with a confidence level so high it removed all doubt. Ariela Quinn had been found. The twist wasn't just that her identity was restored. It was the revelation of why it had been lost in the first place. The early forensic reports had reshaped her features into someone she was not, pushing investigators away from the right paths and families away from the right searches. Older systems had not known how to read her biology accurately. The evidence had been there all along. The tools simply hadn't existed. Delaney received the confirmation in a late-night email. He sat in silence for a long time, letting the truth settle across years of frustration. He printed the portrait and pinned it above his desk, the final version of a face he had carried through doubt, through long nights at the lake, through decades where the trail was nothing but fog. The sheriff's office released a public statement the following day. News outlets carried the story across the region. Online forums lit up with messages of relief, sorrow, and gratitude. In Larkspur Bay, a few older residents remembered seeing the quiet young woman near the cabins that summer. They spoke about her softly, as though recognizing only now how deeply her absence had lingered. When Marianne traveled to Florida to meet with investigators, she brought the shoebox with her. She showed them the postcards, the notebooks, the small pieces of a life that had never stopped moving. She held the silver ring recovered from the site, tears sliding down her face as she closed her fingers around it. It felt both heavy and impossibly light. Science had given Ariela back to her. The silence had finally broken. Hit the like button if you believe justice always finds its way. In the months after the verdict, life in Larkspur Bay shifted in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. The lake still carried its murky quiet, and the reeds still swayed in their familiar patterns, but the heaviness that once clung to the shoreline began to thin. People spoke about the case not with fear or speculation, but with a quiet recognition of what had finally been brought into the light. Small gestures changed the atmosphere, a bench placed near the service road, flowers left by strangers, a shared understanding that the place where Ariela was lost was now also the place where her truth returned. For Marianne, the world softened in slow, deliberate steps. She kept the silver ring on a delicate chain around her neck, letting it rest over her heart as she walked through her days. Its weight grounded her, a reminder of someone she had never stopped loving and a life she had never stopped searching for. She still kept the shoebox, but now it sat on a shelf where she could reach it without flinching. Sometimes she added new items to it, not because they belonged to Ariela, but because they belonged to the story of finding her. She visited Larkspur Bay once more before returning home. Standing by the lake, she listened to the water's soft rhythm and let the wind brush gently against her face. She whispered a few words into the quiet, nothing dramatic, just a simple expression of love and release. The lake gave no answer, but the silence felt different, no longer heavy with absence. It felt fuller, like a place that had witnessed truth and carried it forward. Detective Delaney continued his routines, though something in him had eased. He no longer felt the pull to revisit the service road or the cold case office. Instead, he kept Ariela's reconstructed portrait above his desk, the image printed in soft tones that captured the calm strength he had recognized from the first moment he saw it. When he looked at it now, he felt gratitude more than sorrow. Not every case he worked had reached resolution, but this one, this long wandering story, had come home. What lingered most after the trial wasn't anger or relief, but the quiet understanding of how fragile truth can be. Years of misidentification had obscured who Ariela was, yet a single advance in technology had restored her identity with precision. It reminded everyone touched by the case that justice doesn't move on a familiar clock. Sometimes it arrives late, carried forward by tools that didn't exist before, by hands who refuse to stop searching, by the persistence of family who believe in the power of remembering. The lake became part of her legacy. The wind that skimmed across its surface felt lighter now, as if carrying pieces of her story beyond the reeds that once hid her. And in the warm glow of the Florida sun, Marianne felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in decades: peace. Not the peace that erases grief, but the peace that comes when a story finally reaches its rightful end. Ariela's life had been quiet, marked by small routines, soft gestures, and private hopes. Her absence had been louder, stretching across years. Yet the truth of who she was returned with clarity. And in that return, she offered something to everyone who carried her story. The reminder that even the longest silences can break, and even the deepest questions can find their way to answers. Which case should we tell next? Leave your suggestion below. In the months after the verdict, life in Larkspur Bay shifted in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. The lake still carried its murky quiet, and the reeds still swayed in their familiar patterns, but the heaviness that once clung to the shoreline began to thin. People spoke about the case not with fear or speculation, but with a quiet recognition of what had finally been brought into the light. Small gestures changed the atmosphere, a bench placed near the service road, flowers left by strangers, a shared understanding that the place where Ariela was lost was now also the place where her truth returned. For Marianne, the world softened in slow, deliberate steps. She kept the silver ring on a delicate chain around her neck, letting it rest over her heart as she walked through her days. Its weight grounded her, a reminder of someone she had never stopped loving and a life she had never stopped searching for. She still kept the shoebox, but now it sat on a shelf where she could reach it without flinching. Sometimes she added new items to it, not because they belonged to Ariela, but because they belonged to the story of finding her. She visited Larkspur Bay once more before returning home. Standing by the lake, she listened to the water's soft rhythm and let the wind brush gently against her face. She whispered a few words into the quiet, nothing dramatic, just a simple expression of love and release. The lake gave no answer, but the silence felt different, no longer heavy with absence. It felt fuller, like a place that had witnessed truth and carried it forward. Detective Delaney continued his routines, though something in him had eased. He no longer felt the pull to revisit the service road or the cold case office. Instead, he kept Ariela's reconstructed portrait above his desk, the image printed in soft tones that captured the calm strength he had recognized from the first moment he saw it. When he looked at it now, he felt gratitude more than sorrow. Not every case he worked had reached resolution, but this one, this long wandering story, had come home. What lingered most after the trial wasn't anger or relief, but the quiet understanding of how fragile truth can be. Years of misidentification had obscured who Ariela was, yet a single advance in technology had restored her identity with precision. It reminded everyone touched by the case that justice doesn't move on a familiar clock. Sometimes it arrives late, carried forward by tools that didn't exist before, by hands who refuse to stop searching, by the persistence of family who believe in the power of remembering. The lake became part of her legacy. The wind that skimmed across its surface felt lighter now, as if carrying pieces of her story beyond the reeds that once hid her. And in the warm glow of the Florida sun, Marianne felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in decades: peace. Not the peace that erases grief, but the peace that comes when a story finally reaches its rightful end. Ariela's life had been quiet, marked by small routines, soft gestures, and private hopes. Her absence had been louder, stretching across years. Yet the truth of who she was returned with clarity. And in that return, she offered something to everyone who carried her story. The reminder that even the longest silences can break, and even the deepest questions can find their way to answers. Which case should we tell next? Leave your suggestion below.